am a California native. I grew up going to the beaches of Santa Cruz, taking trips to San Francisco with my friends and enjoying that Golden State sunshine. But after I got married and had kids, I started to see California as a source of my problems rather than a place that was enriching my life. But leaving California isn't as easy as some make it out to be. My wife and I both grew up there, and we knew if we took the leap to move on to another state, it would be very difficult to make our way back if we didn't find that life we were looking for. And we weren't sure if our new home might not have some of the same problems we were facing in California. We wanted to live somewhere that had good weather, was safe and family friendly so our kids could thrive, had good job prospects, and had enough recreation opportunities available that we wouldn't miss all the great things to do that we enjoyed in California. Eventually, we decided to take the biggest risk of our lives, pack the moving truck, and head east to Arizona. So what gave us the push that we needed? Well, we've been thinking about leaving for several years, but I can trace it back to a single incident where I knew it was time to move. We lived in a gorgeous neighborhood in Modesto called Sherwood Forest, and it was one of the more desirable areas in town. One day I was out shopping with our kids at a sporting goods store, and I got pinged on my Ring camera and saw that someone was stealing the packages off our front porch. We quickly went home, and I talked to a few of our neighbors who had seen a suspicious looking car driving around the past couple of hours. I actually spotted the vehicle they described and saw the guy in the midst of stealing someone's packages off their front porch. So I called 911. But rather than come find the perpetrator, the police officer on the other end of the phone basically told me that my problem was not important, that there was no way they could respond in time to catch the guy, and to go home and wait a few hours for someone to come by so they could check their box and file a report. And when the police officer finally came to my house to formally give me the brush off, he basically told me that his list of incident reports was so long, he had so many stabbings, assaults, and other kinds of violent crime that petty theft like what happened to me just isn't something they find all that important to deal with. And that moment of frustration was really the tipping point for me, and it made me realize that this wasn't the kind of place I wanted to raise my kids. But even after that incident, I still had one huge problem, because while I reached my breaking point, my wife still had not gotten there. She was frustrated by a lot of the same things that I was, but she was very entrenched in the community. Her family lived close by, she had an amazing job that she really enjoyed, and she had lots of friends that lived close to us. But not long after my incident with the porch pirate came her moment in the form of the single most disruptive event in our lives: COVID.
The entire state of California ordered to stay at home. That's 40 million people.
This shelter-at-home directive is not a request here, it's an order.
It's no secret that California had some of the most restrictive COVID rules in the country, and it really forced us into a dark place. Being cut off from our friends and family was extremely difficult, especially when I saw our friends and some relatives in Arizona living their lives pretty much the same way they always had. But the blessing of COVID was that my wife's employer finally gave her the freedom to work remotely, and that was the final piece we needed in order to take the risk. And it absolutely was a risk, because what we had in California might have frustrated us a little bit. We really enjoyed the lives that we had, and we didn't want to just be impulsive and move because of a once-in-a-lifetime event like the pandemic. Besides missing our neighborhood, we had a really active social life, and we knew that we would have to be saying goodbye to some of our closest friends.
We didn't want to have any regrets after a couple of years in Arizona, especially after COVID restrictions were eventually lifted, because leaving California typically is a one-way street. When you move to another area, even if you did want to go back, it's extremely difficult, because if you move anywhere else, you're almost certainly entering into a lower cost of living. And unless you're going back to California to take a huge job promotion and have your salary doubled, you'll almost certainly be unable to afford to live exactly where you want to, and your standard of living will take a major hit. We also had never dealt with the number one concern that anyone who moves to Arizona faces: the heat.
A 31-day stretch of 110-degree plus temperatures.
Now, in Modesto, we could still get some extreme heat in the summertime, but even on the days with scorching triple-digit temperatures, it would still cool off enough at night to feel comfortable. In Arizona during the summer, you probably get a 4-hour window very early in the morning where the temperatures reach anything considered tolerable. So, how do we adapt? Well, the first thing I learned very quickly was to be close to two critical things: water, and shade. And believe it or not, Phoenix is surrounded by a lot of water that can make a huge difference on those summer days. There are 7 lakes within a 2-hour drive, and the Salt River flows directly through town. Our home also has a pool in the backyard, and having access to that has made the summers much easier to handle. But the heat wasn't our biggest concern. For us, it really came down to one thing. Would we find a better life in Arizona than the one we left behind in California? Because we weren't one of the people that traded a 900 square foot shack for a 4,000 square foot mansion in Arizona. We actually paid more for our Arizona house than we sold our California home for. But during my first week in Arizona, something happened that made me realize we had made the right choice. After we got settled into our new house, I decided to take our kids down the block to our neighborhood park. I brought a lawn chair and a White Claw with me, fully expecting just to have a relaxing night, keeping an eye on my kids. But as the minutes started to pass, something happened that I had never experienced in any place I had ever lived. People began pouring out of their homes and into the park. And before I knew it, there were 20 other kids out there playing with my kids. And to make things even better, all of my new neighbors came up and introduced themselves. At that moment, it became obvious to me that this was the place we were really going to enjoy living. And 3 years later, I'm still very happy that we decided to move to Arizona. My kids can roam the neighborhood and play with their friends, and we're never worried about their safety. My wife has been able to continue working remotely, has enjoyed meeting new friends, and finding really fun things to do. And we have zero regrets of leaving California. And when we do go back there, some of our first thoughts are, how quickly can we get back to Arizona? Now, I will admit that we got a bit lucky when it came to choosing our neighborhood. We bought our house sight unseen and really didn't have a clue of what we were getting into. But the reason we love Arizona so much is this great place we live. And you should watch this video right here where you can learn more about this incredible neighborhood.